I would like to express gratitude to our keynote speaker, James Sher. I agree with everything he said about Russia and Ukraine. I would like to express gratitude to moderator for his position. And again, I was happy to hear Andrei Bielankovsky on what he said on Russia. So for me, there is no better specialist in Russia than Andrei Bielankovsky, and I enjoyed your remarks. But I assume that to disagree with James, I disagree with one point in your presentation. That is about the necessity of signing and ratifying the association agreement between Ukraine and the European Union. As a representative of Ukrainian opposition, I dare to say that Ukrainian opposition doesn't support at this stage the given neglect of respect of European values and standards on the part of Yanukovych and his regime, to pretend that nothing is going wrong, that for European Union values and standards are not anymore of utmost importance, and it is possible to compromise with Ukrainian authoritarian regime and to sign the agreement as though nothing is taking place. So, fortunately, it is not the case in major EU capitals, and we, in the Ukrainian opposition, we do hope that the agreement will be initial, perhaps by the end of this month, but we do not expect this agreement be signed and later ratified, provided that Yanukovych is not listening, is neglecting and disregarding the messages from the European Union. So, most probably it will be the case and until the elections in Ukraine. Should the elections be fair and free, but I have doubts. So this may be a situation where the European Union may reconsider its position as to the delay in signing and ratifying the convention. Sorry for this probably long comment, but I wanted to make it because this is a very delicate issue for Ukrainian Democrats. This is a very delicate issue for European Union, so I wanted to make it clear. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. This is a song. My name is Walter Briscoe of Toronto. James, you mentioned soft power several times in your talk. Since this is a conference to suggest action items or recommendations, we have several members from the opposition here, Mr. Kurasuk, Mr. Molovaychuk. What advice would you give oppositionists in Ukraine to counter Russian soft power with Ukrainian soft power? For the people that haven't read Mr. Scheer's recent white paper from Chatham House, I recommend an excellent white paper on soft power that just came out from Chatham House. And I also wanted to acknowledge Dr. Vladimir Slitska, the book that's coming out shortly called The Soft Side of Power. So what recommendations do you have to the opposition?
Thank you very much. First of all, may I say, in the interest of Chatham House, I hope you will distinguish between and read two separate publications, my monograph on soft power, which I think will be out and published in the next 2 months, and the recent Chatham House report written by 4 colleagues of mine about that was a separate undertaking. What we call soft power effectively in Russia is referred to by a different name. It is the humanitarian dimension of policy, which is identity politics, it is cultural politics, it is about Ruski Mir, the Russian world, it is about compatriots. It includes such very important issues as what Medvedev has called the rewriting of history. He has set up a presidential commission to correct falsifications of history. One has to ask the question, rewriting of which history? The history written by the Soviet Union? Because there was no commission set up to rewrite that history under Putin and Medvedev. So my ask for advice, I first of all want to say something to our Canadian parliamentarians. There are serious historians and experts about Ukraine in Canada. Canada can do a lot to help bring together and strengthen the community of non-politicized, serious historians and experts in Ukraine who understand the importance of thinking through these controversial historical points in an objective and scholarly way. There has been no pushback on these Russian projects. And I think, and it is unlikely, given the present dispensation in Ukraine, that Ukrainians will be able to do so alone. I can't think of countries better equipped to assist than Poland and Canada.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Alex Kuzma from the Ukrainian Catholic Education Foundation. I'm very gratified to hear Mr. Piatovsky's comments and Dr. Schu's comments about the importance of defiance. The fact that we are not powerless, not only are our governments not powerless, whether Canadian or American, but we as private individuals and citizens of the world are not powerless to defy the power of Putin and the oligarchs and the kleptocrats that assemble around each other. And on behalf of the organization that I work with, the Ukrainian Catholic University, I want to thank the people in this room because many of you responded to a very dire situation developed 2 years ago where the secret police came to the rector of our university, Father Borisov, and demanded that he collaborate somehow and tamp down the protests and the political action of students and professors at the university. There were hundreds of people in this room that responded to that threat in a very simple, concrete way, contacting whether it was their political officials, friends around the world, etc. The next thing you knew, Hillary Clinton was in Kiev meeting with Father Boris, your Prime Minister Harper came and made a very eloquent statement about the importance of academic freedom and religious pluralism. That's just a small thing, but it did evoke a very direct response from the powers that be in Kiev, where the head of the secret police, along with the venerable, or not so venerable, Pani Hadron, came to apologize to the rector for harassing him. Now, that may seem like a small thing, but it's not. It's probably the first time in history where we've had the head of the secret police coming and apologizing to a would-be victim for what they could have done. And I would suggest, given everything that we have witnessed just within the last year, not only looking at what happened in Ukraine and Georgia, looking at what happened in Tunisia, in Egypt, what is tragically happening right now in Syria, is the fact that the forces of democracy, the forces of humanity, are mobilizing against the powers of darkness in this world. We have to be supporting those forces and recognizing where they exist, whether it's in the economic sphere, with people that are working to build small businesses in Ukraine, whether it's in the religious sphere. There's a tremendous battle that is now mobilizing between the Russian Orthodox Church trying to impose monolithic structures in Ukraine and Russia. Ukraine still has religious pluralism. For better or for worse, we still have many denominations that can still operate relatively freely. We've got to work with those people that have a state maintaining religious pluralism. That means that everyone in this room, whether Orthodox, Catholic, Evangelical, whatever, Jewish, Muslim, we have an opportunity to reach out to the religious community and to defy and denounce what is happening in terms of the erosion of human rights in Ukraine. So I just want to ask, and I'm apologetic for perhaps getting a little emotional about this, but I did want to ask Mr. Piatovsky how you see the opportunity of the Ukrainian community to also support the democratic forces in Russia. Is there a way for us to play a role? And is there a way for us to collaborate across across borders to strengthen the democratic forces as well. Thank you.
First of all, I would like to make final comments in my life on this divisive issue of European Union-Ukraine Association Agreement. Least of all, I would like to interfere in discussion inside Ukrainian opposition, but I know that there are some different opinions on this subject. As I understood, Boris Ivanovich, his concern is that such signing will give tacit support to Mr. Yanukovych, close eyes, Europe close eyes on all his abrogation of democracy and human rights. But I am suggesting a twofold decision. Signing with simultaneous, very sharp condemnation of the policy of Yanukovych. And I think that such approach would inflict a double humiliation on him, because it would demonstrate that Europe signing this agreement for the future of Ukraine, for the future Ukrainian government. It doesn't want to see Yanukovych in his today position. As for help for Russian democracy, well, I can only repeat the same thing which I'm repeating for the latest 7 or 8 years from the beginning of Orange Revolution. The success story of Ukraine would be decisive factor in other battle for democracy, European option, and human dignity.
Go ahead.
Miroslava Olesiuk, editor-in-chief Mr. Amsterdam, you said we should pursue, please, the assets of Mr. Putin and the like. At yesterday's panel, the Polish representative, Mr. Checki, said that, oh, that's very difficult, and you have to process, you have to proceed with the legals, you have to. And in fact, on another occasion, at another meeting, your partner in Amsterdam, Mr. Pera, also raised the horrendous problems with that. Could you give us some strategy, hope that all these objections can be realistically overcome?
Sure. First thing I'll tell you that I found in doing these types of cases all over the world is there are all sorts of legal obstacles to seizure. But you know what? There's no legal obstacle to exposure. And let me tell you, when you put a leader's assets in front of his people, and you say, Vlad, how did you get 17% of Sir Putin Neftegas? How did that happen? And you show the diagrams of where the money goes. Or you show some of the yachts that are being held for him by some of the oligarchs. Or you see his magnificent billion-dollar estate on the Black Sea. And you put it all together in a book, on a website, you're halfway home. You don't have to control the asset. If you expose the asset, you're halfway there. It's a tremendous method of delegitimizing, and it's happening right now in respect to a country called Equatorial Guinea and others. And in respect to Putin, if you read the white papers of Milov and others recently, it's absolutely outlined in many of those. The point is, and the problem is, we aren't that great at communicating those facts. And we need, especially an organization like yours, needs to adopt this exposure, this name and shame, as part of what it wants from Canadian politicians. We have massive resources in this country to expose and analyze
these kinds of investigations. We have, the United States is the world leader. They don't just bother to operate in the United States. The United States believes it can operate and legislate extraterritorially. They're indicting banks in Switzerland. They're stopping at nothing to go after those Americans who may not have paid their taxes in various years. They have a huge bureaucracy that can go and make those findings, just as they've been doing with Iran, with tremendous success. U.S. Treasury has brought many of the leaders in Iran to their knees. They can do it. We need to help them get the political will, and that's where an organization such as yours is there. I'm not going to take the time, we have other people to ask questions, to go through all of the legal constraints, of which there would be some, absolutely, but it is not impossible, and exposure is getting halfway there. So, thank you for your question.